Hello. This is a speech about human cadavers, and rather a shortage of human cadavers. There isn't really any technical vocabulary in this one. I will make reference to first-person consent and second-person consent, but I'll explain in the speech exactly what that means. Other than that, I think it's pretty straightforward. So I'll start now. Ladies and gentlemen, if it's true that one part of our brain controls language and a different part of our brain controls maths or scientific thought, then my sister and I may well be the poster children for this truism. She's the scientist and I'm the linguist. When she was in university doing her science degree, she used to love to regale me with stories about all the animals she had to dissect. She dissected rabbits, hedgehogs, bats, rats, even dogs. Personally, I can't think of anything worse than having to dissect an animal, and I certainly want to spare myself the thought of having to dissect a human body. But human dissection is, of course, a very important part both of medical research and of surgical training. And that means that there's always a demand for human cadavers. There's a huge irony then in the fact that in the midst of a global pandemic that thus far has killed over 4 million people, we're actually seeing a shortage of human cadavers. Now, how can that be? Why is that happening? Well, there are a number of reasons for it. And they're not all exclusively related to the COVID-19 pandemic. There were issues with the supply of human cadavers before the pandemic ever started. One reason, for example, is public squeamishness. I don't think any of us likes to think about our own death, and we don't like to think either about what will happen to our bodies after we've died. But if you think about it, that's a very inconsistent approach. Compare it, for example, to how we feel about organ donation. Organ donation is viewed as a very positive thing to do, and rightly so. And people are encouraged to donate organs. But for some reason, there isn't the same encouragement, there isn't the same positivity around donating the entire body. Another reason for problems with supply of human cadavers has been tight regulations. In the UK, for example, second-person consent used to be allowed. Now, what does that mean exactly? Second-person consent means that the next of kin of the deceased could choose to donate their body. So if you had a very annoying relative and you didn't want to have to pay their funeral costs, which incidentally can be quite high in the United Kingdom, a basic cremation, for example, costs on average £3,946, while a basic burial on average will set you back £4,893. So these are significant sums of money. If you didn't want to have to pay those costs to bury your relative, you could simply donate their body without their consent. But the law changed in the UK back in 2004, and now only first-person consent is permitted. That means that a person has to fill out a form or make a declaration of some kind to indicate that they're okay with their body being donated after their death. Then we come to the impact of the pandemic itself on the supply of human cadavers. It's fair to say that donations stalled completely, especially in the early phases of the pandemic, because people just didn't know whether bodies were infectious or not. And then, of course, it's also true to say that medical facilities had other priorities, overwhelmed as they were with taking care of COVID patients. We've probably all seen those images from Italy and Brazil, where the priority was to bury people as quickly as possible, because otherwise bodies would literally be piling up in the streets. Given these supply issues then for human cadavers, what choices do we have to ensure that the demand for cadavers can be met? Well, we have a few choices. One would be we could import cadavers from other countries where rules are a bit looser. The United States, for example. In the US, unclaimed bodies from prisons or homeless shelters can be donated, and second-person consent is still allowed in the US. So what this means is that so-called body brokers can acquire these unclaimed bodies from prisons or homeless shelters, as I've said, and can sell them on to medical schools or research institutions. And all of this is entirely legal. So how much can a body broker expect to make? Well, for an entire human cadaver, you could expect to make between $3,000 and $5,000. A head goes for $500, a spine for $300, and the body broker can expect to make $350 for a foot. I must admit, I'm feeling a bit squeamish myself. I do find this lack of regulation in the US a bit disturbing. I worry that the vulnerable and the less well-off, who perhaps can't afford a funeral for their deceased loved ones, will simply sell the body off to these body brokers, and then the body ends up, well, who knows where. A second option we have is that instead of using human cadavers for medical training and for surgical training, we could use animals instead. In fact, that happens today. Surgeons in lots of countries around the world train on live animals. But as you can imagine, it's a pretty controversial topic. And here in Western Europe, where we love our pets so much, it's really not going to fly, I don't think. The good news is, though, that virtual human cadavers and surgical simulators are on the way. Indeed, they already exist. They're already being used in some countries, but not on a very widespread basis. So we're likely to see the demand for human cadavers continue to increase, at least in the short term. Ladies and gentlemen, I'll conclude by saying there are no easy answers here. But I know one thing for sure. If we want medical research to continue, and if we want surgeons to continue training, and if we don't want an arm and a leg to cost an arm and a leg, we're going to have to get a lot more creative and probably a lot less squeamish. Thank you.